What's good, y'all? This is SA, and this is month 4 of devlogging my indie game, Guardians of RPG, where so far we've made improvements to and added new game features to the project. Check out the previous videos if you want to learn more. But this time, I wanted to focus on adding a few features that should have been added to versions 1.02. These features would have helped with exploration, but were eventually cut due to a limited amount of time. The wild grass feature and the map feature. If you ever played Pokemon or any similar RPG games, you know the importance of having a wild encounter feature in general. One of the ways my players will gain experience is through battle, and if you go most of your journey not fighting random encounters, you may face mandatory enemies in the story that you're unprepared to defeat, whether it's due to the lack of stats or the lack of resources. Wild encounters give you the opportunity to gain experience through battle, learn more of the battle mechanics, and obtain item drops after defeating a wild enemy. In short, having a wild encounter feature generally makes progression in the game easier. In previous versions of my game, not having these features made it either really difficult or very one-dimensional. Versions 1.01 had an extremely hard boss fight where you were fighting 3 enemies at once, and versions 1.02 adjusted it so where the fight felt super easy. A wild encounter feature in my own game will allow me to set a range of difficulty for enemies, with the hopes that if progressing through the game naturally isn't enough to defeat them, they can use these features as a way to catch up. But to make wild encounters work, I needed to add the wild grass. So let me show you how I did it. GIF has 2 bush sprites, one that acts as the background sprite, and the other that acts as the foreground sprite. So one would imagine all you would have to do is place all the sprites in their own layer. The background grass on layer 1, the player on layer 2, and the foreground grass on layer 3, right? Well, everything would look fine if you were walking left and right through the field, but once you traveled up and down through the field, you could see some inconsistencies in this approach. The problem is, when moving from one bush to another, I still need to find a way to have the lower section of each bush not obscure the sprite's face. One devlog video I was looking into resolved this issue by splitting up their sprite's character into multiple parts, after which they were able to place different parts of the sprites in different layers. This solution allowed them to customize their sprites in many different ways, but I'm not even gonna lie to you, I'm not doing all that. And thankfully, I didn't have to. Unity has this component you can add to your game object called a mask, and this allows you to cover up a range of layers and sorting orders inside or outside the mask's barrier. Using this, I was able to create a mask on the player's sprite face and customize this mask to allow the face to be shown while the bottom grass layer remained covered. This still gives the impression that the grass is tall enough to cover the player's legs without any of the weird layering issues. After sorting these layers, there was still something I needed to do in order to make the grass feature really pop, and that was to add animation. If you've played any games that allow you to explore grassy areas, you'd see that the animation is what really helps sell the idea that the player is actually walking through grass. And there are many ways in which devs do this. One way would have been to animate each patch of grass that the player goes through. But I decided to take the old school approach and animate the grass effects every time the player steps into a patch of grass. When getting a feel on how to animate the actual grass effects, I took inspiration from Pokemon Fire Red to see how they animated their own sprites. Then when animating the grass effects myself, I experimented with how many frames I wanted until I was comfortable with how it looked. Then I wrote up a simple program that played the grass sprite whenever the player was moving in the grass and stopped the animation whenever that was not the case. It's still not perfect, and it has its moments that would require a bit more refining, but I decided it looked good enough to stop for now, program the wild encounter code, and move on to the next feature in the game, the maps. So, the last thing I did for this update was add a map for the player to use. Not only will your player be traveling around the world, but other characters, books, and the story itself will reference different locations and places. Having a map will allow you as a player to understand the world you occupy and to see where you are relative to the world around you. Truth be told, I actually designed a map for this game years ago, but I just never got around to actually designing it in-game. But using GIF's overworld sprites, I thankfully didn't have to do every single thing from scratch. though figuring out how to translate the sketch to the game was still very challenging. I'll spare you the details, but it took a lot of time layering the different sprites, such as the deep waters from the shallow waters, landmass, textures, trees, houses. I mean, you get the point. You can see in the map itself that there are still some places that could still use a bit more work. But once all of this was done, the next part was creating a UI for the map that would allow the player to not only see where they are in relation to the world, but also allow them to see more details about certain places and locations. The way the map works is pretty straightforward. Clicking on the map icon, the icon I created myself by the way, would open up the map scene. At this point, you should be able to see not only the entire map of RPG, but also where you are in the map with the cursor sprite. The buttons that are associated with each location would be the triggers that allow you to zoom into each spot in the map and get an even more detailed look and description of the location in question. Then you would click the back button to see the entire world once more, and click the back button again to exit the map. Right now, the demo will just take place in Tiro Town. But in the future, this map could be used to include new features like hidden locations or fast travel. So I thought it would be a nice touch to implement this feature in the game early for versions 1.03. And that's all I got for you guys today. As usual, if there was any topics that you guys wanted more information on, I've left some links in the description that helped me get started on some of these features. I know this month didn't have too many updates, but that's because I'm gearing up to talk about some more complicated mechanics in the upcoming months towards the year's end. So be sure to stick around if you want to see more of that. And if you want to show your support, feel free to playtest previous versions of Guardians of RPG and let me know what features you want to see added or improved. And with that being said, I'll see y'all later. Peace.